Welcome to another episode of GQ Speaks, your go-to platform for insightful conversations, captivating stories, and thought-provoking discussions. GQ is a series of experiences, and we're just making sense of that as we go along. That is what we're doing here, one conversation at a time. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into our episode. Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning into this special episode of GQ Speaks. I'm Rimas Al-Hawari, and I'll be co-moderating this conversation alongside my fellow club leadership member, Ibrahim Absar.
Today we're addressing a topic that has sparked intense conversation across campus: the recent amendments to the SGA Constitution made on March 18, 2025. It was sent by an email addressed to the student body. The amendments introduced new eligibility requirements for presidential and vice presidential candidates, requiring 1 year and 1 semester of SGA experience respectively. They also outlined updates in first-year elections and introduced a formal committee to assist with election procedures.
Initially, these changes were met with little reaction, but in the days that followed, concern began to grow. Students began to question the legitimacy and intent behind the amendments, calling into question the transparency of the decision, the process by which it was passed, and whether it reflects the will of the student body.
WhatsApp group chats quickly became forums for debate, and tensions surrounding the SGA's decision intensified. Although a tabling event was held on March 20th to address these concerns, frustrations continued to ripple throughout the student community, with some students even calling for the dissolution of the SGA itself.
We found it only appropriate to use our platform to have a civil discussion on the recent amendments to the SGA Constitution and what it means for our democracy. For your reference, a link to our Constitution is provided in the episode's description.
So joining us today are two SGA representatives, Naghla Abdul Hadi, president of the SGA, and Yasmin Ahmed, who serves as SGA's public relations officer. On the other side, representing the wider concerns of the student body, will be Noor Pana from the class of 2028 and Ali Nasser from the class of 2026.
Hi everyone, my name is Naghla Abdul Hadi. I'm a senior at Georgetown and I'm the student body president. So I just want to start by thanking GQ Speaks for having us for this podcast. We are really happy to sort of have the environment to engage with the discussion, regardless of what the amendment is going to look like, regardless of how the final outcome is going to be. We still want to really clear out the air, explain our side, discuss this with the student body. So it can definitely be a moment of transparency and learning for us as well as an organization. So we're very happy to be here, and I have with me as well.
Hi, I'm Yasmin Ahmed, the PRO, Public Relations Officer for the SJ this year. I'm really thankful to be here, to be honest, and be able to explain kind of like our side of things, especially after how this week unfolded. So I'm very happy to be here.
On the other side of the table, I'm Noor Al-Haq Pano, and I am here to represent the student body and basically in regards to everything that happened. The views that I will be sharing today may not necessarily be mine, but the views of the student body and what the people believe.
My name is Ali. I'm a junior. I actually handle the social media for GQ Speaks. And regardless of what the amendment looks like and what my personal opinion on it is, I'm honestly very glad to see the turnout amongst the student body. Because as in my 3 years as a student, this is the first time where I've seen the student body being very active and very vocal with their opinions. I'm also very grateful that the SGA has agreed to be here, because I feel like there's one thing of, texting on group chats, but there's another thing to hear what that other person actually thinks. So I hope, I think we might not leave this conversation being convinced of the other side, but I just hope that we try to understand what the other side really thinks and try to understand where they're coming from. So with that, I'll start the conversations with the Instagram questions.
Before that, Naghla, would you like to share your, you wanted to give some points?
Honestly, I just wanted to set the tone for the conversation. I just want to highlight that it was never SGA against student body, before we start with the questions. And when we say we're here to explain our side, it's not sort of, again, our side against the student body side. It's our side as an organization, sort of like a snippet into the SGA meeting. How have we come to this discussion? why did we decide the way we decided and how this amendment even came to be. So I do really want to highlight that. And at the end of the day, we are still assessing and monitoring student perspective. And if student perspective is significant enough against this amendment, I want to say that it's absolutely nothing personal, not an ego issue for us. We would be happy to reverse it if it goes through the democratic process and needs to be reversed. And I think I do actually really agree with Ali. I was actually just having this conversation with someone else that regardless of why the student body reacted the way they did, it's very interesting to see that in my last 4 years here as a senior, we've very, very rarely had discussions like these and very rarely had the entire community active for 4 or 5 days on the WhatsApp group chats back and forth. I think that is when for me it was a moment of, okay, this is a big issue and needs to be addressed.
All right. Before we start that, sorry, I wanted to ask one question before we get into questions from Instagram, just to understand basically more and give some information to the other students as well. From the SGA's side, what is the true purpose of this amendment?
I'm going to sort of keep it short to not repeat my statement because I feel like people are tired of hearing the same thing. But the way we were thinking of this is a conversation that happens with every president when they're sort of in their outgoing president phase. I only have about 3 or 4 more weeks to go in my position. And I was having conversation with senior leadership, sort of how will SGA look like in the next year? What do you guys feel like you have done this year? And what is the advice for future leadership? Why are we going to be worried about engagement? Because this was one thing that we were truly worried about. I think it was really a moment of surprise for me this year. I don't know if you guys will remember this, but April, when elections happened last year, there were only elections for exec positions. So obviously first years would not have that insight, but only exec candidates ran. All 3 batches went unrepresented. Not a single candidate went for it. And this was definitely a moment, even when I was elected, like I was super happy, obviously, to be elected, but I was like, okay, I'm elected for what? With the batch, I don't even have any batch representatives. I don't even have a team. And it was very disappointing because the sort of like the president can only do so much if I don't have a team. So I think this was a conversation that we revisited this year to basically say, what are the reasons people are not going for class reps? The batch of 2026, for example, like I kept hearing insight that they feel like their class reps have been just appointed year by year. But also, for example, for this year, we opened elections 3 times for the class of 2026, and it was only the 2 representatives that I currently have, Jay and Lawrence. So I think it's definitely a conversation of what is currently happening on campus. Why are people not going for class reps? And we need to get to the bottom of this, even if not through this amendment, through other causes. So this was sort of the purpose of this. We've also been trying to formalize SGA a bit more in a sense that this was actually Dean Ken's mission. You can see it in his article as well. He wants to give the SGA more presence. He feels like in other universities, SGAs are giving more presence and sort of their influence on campus is a bit more visible. So he also wants to do that. So I felt like this would also come through institutional knowledge, SGA experience, and a president that can be both, essentially, while having class reps who are engaged. So this was sort of the holistic vision, and that's why it was taken to the meeting.
So I'll follow up on that before I ask the questions from Instagram because, to try to sort of understand the SGA's point of view on this. So what we essentially got from it is that this was essentially done to combat the disengagement that does exist between the student government and the student body or the student population, right? But could you sort of explain how does this play out actually? Because essentially, if you're limiting the scope of people who can run for these positions, then how are you actually increasing the engagement?
I mean, and I'll start and Yasmin, you can add on it how you want. But I think the way we thought of it is, for example, let's say you have 3 candidates this year that are running for president. I've personally not heard of any candidates yet, but I mean, not everyone comes and tells us, right? But let's say you have 3 candidates that want to run for president. If 2 of them have experience, but then 1 person might not yet have that experience, if they are truly passionate about sort of being an SGA, being in support of students, then they would consider, for example, running for a PRO or running for chief of staff or running to represent their batch. So it was a thing of, it's also very similar, for example, I'm going to give the example of the MUN board. I know it's very different because it's not an election sort of thing, but the secretary general position was always you have to have served on the board for 1 year to get that experience. So, for example, when I was a sophomore applying to that, I knew I couldn't apply to SecGen, so I applied to head of comms and I got that experience and then I applied to SecGen. So I was hoping people would have that similar mindset that I am passionate about SGA. I am passionate about serving students. But maybe if I can't go for the top position, maybe the third top position, maybe the fourth, maybe class reps. So that's sort of how we came for it. It was also a thing of, at that point, I've noticed the pattern that everyone who runs for president already have SGA experience. So I didn't feel like we would be limiting people who do and want to run. Like in my year, with the exception of one candidate, all three of us had SGA experience. And then when Mariam and Joski were running, all candidates had SGA experience and, same and so forth. So it didn't feel like we'd be limiting a population of the student body that is not there, if that makes sense.
We want people who are not just going for president just for the CV or going for president just to have the title or the authority or whatever. It was more to have someone that genuinely does care about change, because we believe that that person would have the most effective change.
So essentially, in a nutshell, this is what I get from it, is that this is being done to sort of create an incentive to get more people to actually come and join, because you don't want people to just come in and try to look for the president or the vice presidency positions, but you want these people who are truly trusted to, if they actually want to become president, to start in their, let's say, like freshman or sophomore year and serve for a year before they're eligible for that position. So like there's an incentive to, if you want to become president, you need to be a part of the SGA, you need to contribute. Okay. So with that cleared up, let's move on to the Instagram questions that we received. So the first one is, what are the procedures in place for making amendments like these, and are they followed according to the Constitution?
There are obviously procedures in place for amendments. So basically, what the SGA has to do for an amendment to pass or to even reach the SGA, it has to be submitted in a written form to the president. So I did receive that sort of submission of the amendment. And then I emailed my SGA letting them know that we're going to be discussing constitutional changes on that day. And then I basically checked the Constitution to see if there's anything that sort of goes against the nature of the amendment. And then basically what we have to say is discuss this with SGA. So it was a meeting exactly like we guys are sitting now. And I said, here's how it is. And then here's my point of view. I did give my point of view. And then they also sort of went back and forth. And I'm going to be honest and say, even within SGA, it was not like a unanimous yes, right? It was 2/3 majority. But even then, there were still discussions of exactly what you guys are saying. What about engagement? What about this? So we did go back and forth and problematize it together. And then we voted. I kept my vote last, to be honest, just because I did not want my position to influence how the rest of the SGA would vote. So after the voting was done, we voted on the other amendments separately. So we have 4 amendments, actually. I think the 2 that people are upset about are the VP and the president. I don't think anyone is upset about the first-year elections or the election committee. Those are more like logistical things, to be honest. But basically, once they're in, I have to approve it through Dean Ken and Uday, our SGA advisor, and then Dean of Students. So that was done. And only then I was able to communicate it with the student body. So it followed the constitution procedure. But yeah, that's it from my side.
And just to add on within the meeting dynamic, because from like my experience, first time seeing that, it genuinely was a really big like back and forth and us all talking about the specific details, even with the other 2 amendments that people don't necessarily have an issue with. We were genuinely talking about the fine details of how would this work, would this be beneficial, and each class representative kind of talking from their perspective. So that discussion was genuinely like very effective, I think, and it did go like really back and forth. Like it wasn't just one person bringing it up and just voted and kind of left it.
Yeah, just a continuation to that point. Was it, just to clarify, was it the student body who proposed this amendment, or was it the SGA?
No, it was an SGA member. I mean, that is how it is in our constitution as well. Yeah.
Okay, and in regards to amendment, a concern that was shared throughout the student body that I received was that the amendment generally just happened too fast. We got the email in the start of the week, and by the end of the week, or 1.5 weeks later, we already had voted on it and decided the result of the amendment. I don't remember the time frame exactly, but it didn't take that long, and that was a problem that a lot of people had, considering the fact that not everybody was aware of the amendment. I understand we had an email that said that we're going to be discussing the amendment and you should come, but won't you feel that for a constitutional amendment to occur, it should have more it should have more publicity, as in like after the discussion for amendment was done, it could have been shared that these were some of the points that we have discussed. This is the amendment that we would be voting on. And then after that, after the amendment has been gathered and decided that we'll vote, don't you think it would be better that for another discussion to happen to see what generally the student body believes, so that this kind of interaction where the amendment has already been voted on and then we have a lot of backlash from student body, don't you think that would be a better way to manage this sort of issues?
Honestly, I get that perspective. And I mean, it's good that we're now having these conversations. Maybe that's one thing that the other student bodies didn't pick up on, but maybe that's something our student body is now passionate about, sort of being more involved with constitutional changes. The way that we sort of get with the student body, I know it seemed like it happened too fast, but that is just how the process is, because when it was communicating to the student bodies, it was already approved. So that's why it feels like it was fast. We were basically, this was our transparency moment, saying these are the changes that have happened. And then tabling was supposed to happen anyways. Even if we didn't get backlash, we were meant to host 2 tabling sessions. And that is really our purpose, to basically talk to the students, see if people have backlash with the amendments, see what the general sort of student perspective is. And then from there, it would be basically binding for elections. I mean, and that is how it was. I've only seen 2 constitution changes as a student here. I've seen an a constitution change by President Benjamin, and then I've seen one by President Mariam as well. I have served on the SGA last year when the constitution changed under the leadership of President Mariam, and it was done the same way. So this is also how I learned it, and this is how the process is, that basically once it is approved by SGA, the perception is that the student body is not going to have an issue, because the SGA opinion is supposed to be the student body opinion, right? Like when I am voting, let's say if I'm junior class rep, for example, when I'm voting, I'm not voting as junior class rep Negla, I'm voting as junior class rep that is representing the batch of 2026, and I don't have my own opinion. So I think that is why we sort of don't really open it to the bigger student body, because the perception is you already have that student body perspective. Also, it was out of logistical concerns. So if we do open it up and sort of say, here is the pending amendments, right? At that point, it would be an issue of how do we gather student input? Because the only way we can gather it honestly, accurately, and to represent would be through some sort of survey. And at that point, it would almost be like a referendum without even having to go through the steps, because we needed to get it some sort of quantitative method. Or else other way, people would still say that this was not representative. Maybe Yasmin came to tabling, but Sama couldn't come to tabling. So why take Yasmin's opinion and not Sama's? So I think when people look at sort of SGA decisions, they think that we try to be exclusive, but it's quite the opposite. Even now, the reason we've taken so many days is we've literally been tallying the messages on the group chat. We're seeing how many people are speaking for, how many people are speaking against, how many people came to our tabling. And even from then, we're looking at number of sort of what is the opposition? What are the reasons? So that is where we were coming from. It was a thing of, if we are to get the entire student body's perspective, how do we do that in a fair manner? But I do think it's good feedback for future SGAs to consider that maybe it should be in the constitution that there is a reading period. So basically amendment is introduced, class reps go back to the student body and say amendment 1, 2, 3, that's what they say. And then the SGA still votes within the same procedure, but after having some time to table with their batches.
Yeah.
I feel like that would have solved the issue. So that is definitely something we might actually look into adding in our constitution itself to avoid this from happening again.
Yeah. And also this kind of brings in light one of the issues that some of the people have, is that the representatives who are supposed to represent them were not engaging with them as much. And I understand that from SGA's side, you cannot be going to every kind of student and asking for their feedback. I understand that the SGAs are students at the end of the day as well. This is a volunteering position. We don't get paid or anything. So it was a concern that there was not enough of back and forth between the representative and the people. And when sometimes the student body did bring up the issue and raised their opinions, some of the SGA members became a bit defensive. And rather than trying to represent them and say, okay, I see that everybody in here has this issue, let me bring it up to the SGA meeting and see how this plays out. They were all the time trying to defend the amendment. And I understand that you vote on it, so therefore you have to defend it. But I think the general approach, and this is a general feedback in future, could be kind of improved to ensure that there's no more rift created between SGA and the student body, and we all have a positive experience at the end of the day.
Just one thing, I'm sort of gonna switch over to the other side because I just want to give the benefit of the doubt to the people who were handling it, because it's my first time in 3 years that for the first time I see that people are caring about an amendment, right? Because amendments had been passed before, changes had been made by the SGA, and half of the student population probably didn't even know that those amendments or those changes were being made. So I'd like to give the benefit of the doubt that because there was a standard procedure of how things were being done before, it was sort of like this is just how things were being done, that there was never really, a reason to change the process. But with that being said, I think regardless of the fact that the amendment passes or not, I think this is a very good moment for the SGA to reflect that, you can have moments like these where you will face an outrage from people, right? This is the first time in 3 years that I've seen that class reps were actively being called out. That, hey, you're a class representative. You're supposed to represent the opinion of the batch. And again, as it's been said before, that none of us were being asked. None of us felt that our opinions were truly represented. So it does give the SGA a lot to think that in future they have to be very careful when handling such processes to ensure that an outrage like this does not happen. With that, I will transition into the next question. So, if in previous years, all elected presidents had SGA involvement anyways, then why was it necessary to pass the amendment? So, considering the fact that, so they've used the word incompetent. I wouldn't use the word, but incompetent. But I would say inexperienced individuals weren't elected before. Then why is it necessary? Why couldn't it be, just a fair election where you let both individuals run, and then you trust the opinion of the student body. You trust the student body to make the right decision, which they've done so in the past. Like you've said, the past 4 SGA presidents all have been, including Nagla, all 4 have been experienced SGA members. So then why was it necessary in the first place?
Okay, guys, these are very loaded questions. So I'm going to sort of break them down a bit, and then Yasmin, you can sort of go from here, and you can also provide context as a former class rep and everything. But I'll start with Noor before I forget the questions. Basically, Noor, I understand what you sort of mentioned about class reps and their disconnect. That's how I would put it. But sort of from our side as well, I think the issue has been that the student body is not, up until this point, the student body has not been engaging with their class reps. And I can tell you, as someone who does SLC every time, sends out the form, sends text on the group chats, emails, everything, I still have to sort of go around and beg the student body, like, please tell me your issues. And while we are always happy to do that, that's why we're elected. It's not a favor. I'm not putting it as a favor. That's our job. But I think there needs to be some sort of accountability that if I have an issue, I convey it. Because that's how I am as a person as well. I only joined SGA in my junior year. Before that, if I had an issue, you best bet they heard about it. Because that's their job. Their job is to solve the issues I'm facing, right? So I think this was an issue that people are just not engaging. And when we do go to them, it would be a thing of like, oh yeah, everything is good. This is literally what we heard in Karakan conversations so many times. They would take the Karak and then they would be like, everything is good, guys. Keep doing what you do. Keep doing you. Everything is fine.
Yeah.
So that's why also it came to us as shocking, because we were like, oh, people had all these like issues they're bottling up, but no one ever voiced them to us, right?
And to just like add on to that, like that, I kind of saw the both sides of that from, because I don't know if many people know this. I started off as a freshman class rep when I came in from the summer, and then the PRO position became vacant, and then I got elected as PRO. And so I kind of saw both sides of that. When I was a class representative, I served on academic council, which is chaired by the chief of staff, Sama Laisa. And part of that was me trying to ask first year students what they thought about pro-seminar classes. And I remember having to go around the lounge begging people to like give me suggestions and answer me. And then I saw the flip side of the low engagement with PRO as well, with me like planning the events and the logistics behind that, and then seeing the disappointing turnout behind that. And even like Nagla mentioned with Karak and Conversation, we genuinely tried everything. We tried prompting people, we tried asking, and it was always just like, yeah, we're good, which is also kind of to add on what you were saying, Ali, like about people never kind of brought up issues before with the Constitution or issues with how we did things. It was always just like, yeah, keep doing you, it's all good. So, yeah.
And I think, Noor, about the point of defensiveness, this was actually even an argument in our own meeting, sort of, how is the tone of the SGA on the group chat? So that is one thing we really want to break down. I think it did not mean to start as defensive, to be honest. We are not defending the amendment. And even now, we're not here to defend the amendment, by the way. We're just here to have this discussion with all of you. But it's a thing of when people, for example, were saying it's unconstitutional or undemocratic, at that point, you sort of need to respond and say, no, but we followed the right procedure.
Yeah.
And this is not you sort of putting up a wall or being defensive. It's just you clearing it out as well, because not everyone is informed. So, for example, you might know that it's procedure, but then other people don't know that. And some people were genuinely like surprised, like, no, this is not constitutional. And we're like, no, that's not the case, you know? And also, I don't know if everyone knows sort of how bad it got for some of the class reps, but I was genuinely concerned for some of the class reps. And I have encouraged them to seek proper resources, to file code of conduct for certain issues, because at the end of the day, we're also still students. There were quite literally some hate attacks on some of the reps. And I think at some point, it's sort of where do you draw the line with trying to hear everyone out, but also protecting yourself as an individual, right? You would not go to a staff member and hate crime them, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, you would respectfully relay feedback. So I think people thought that we have an issue with the disagreement, when in reality, it was all about just, guys, be collected. Like, that's why, for example, we never had an issue with the petition. If you're going to be collected, relay the same message, give us numbers, happy to take that into consideration. But the tone was never meant to be defensive. So yeah, that was that. And then Ali, with your question about sort of why formalize it, it was honestly just to formalize a pattern that we already noticed, not out of nothing, but for example, even the fourth clause, I'm not sure if people gave it attention, the election committee that is meant to aid with elections. This was always the way it happened. Senior class reps always advised the SGA advisor, president just always took part, but there was never anything formal to say that. So in terms of continuity, for example, last year, they struggled a bit with doing that because there was nothing written in the Constitution to say that they have the right to do this. And so we're sort of wanting to ensure that there is continuity and that this is sometime in writing. It's not that we don't trust the voter, by the way. It's also, I think of, you said it perfectly, it's an incentive. I really wanted this to be an incentive for people to say, okay, if I don't get this, I can get something else. Because the way elections happen is all posts are out the same time. So if, let's say, I'm going to give a crazy number, but if 10 people are going to run for president, we lose 9 candidates who are interested in SGA, I hope so, and don't get to do any other position because they lose presidential candidate. And at that point, class reps are already picked as well. So like you lose so many people that run for positions that they don't get out of that. And thing is, if we realize that the student body is not even going to elect people who are not necessarily experienced, it was us wanting to pull some of those people in other positions, rather than them losing and sort of having to disengage with SGA completely. So that was sort of like the logic behind it, essentially.
Just a quick counterpoint. So hypothetically, like, let's assume that the amendment passes, and let's say that next year you have people who run for president, right? You have 2 candidates who are eligible to run, and they run for the presidency. But the student body doesn't want any of them, right? But because of the fact that now you've limited the scope, you've limited a potential third option who potentially, if he or she ran for the presidency, would have gotten more support from the students, and they would have won the election, right? And so how do you counter that? And how do you counter that? And it's also like, let me reframe the question in a way. So considering what's happened now, anyone who becomes president next year, it's going to be a very hard time for them, right? Because now whoever becomes president, especially next year, there's always going to be someone who is going to bring up the fact that, hey, you didn't deserve this. The only reason you became president is because there were only 2 options, right? or if I had the chance to run for presidency, I would have probably beaten you. So how do you respond to that?
I mean, I think it's a valid concern. Again, I think when we were making these decisions, we were just thinking numbers and patterns, right? So when we looked at the numbers, the highest candidate number that we've had in the past 4 years has been 4, which was last year. And as I said, literally two at that point, 3 candidates out of 4 had SGA experience. So it didn't even feel that we are limiting a population of the student body that even goes for these positions, right? It just felt like a formalization that then gets our people to sort of reroutes them to other positions. Because again, if the numbers prove that almost all candidates that run for these positions have SGA experience anyways, we didn't think it would be necessarily sort of removing someone who's deserving of it but does not have experience. I mean, I think it's a tricky thing because, as you said, I already honestly feel bad for the next SGA, the next president. I feel like they're going to have a lot of pressure on them and it's always going to be that doubtful. But I have trust that whoever is going to win will be able to sort of maneuver that and win the students. I feel like it's not like a point of no return. I feel like you can always win the student trust when you show that you really want to hear them out. And I mean, even without this amendment, sometimes 3 people will run and we don't want any of them, to be honest, right? Sometimes it's just that. Sometimes you'll have, even the year, for example, I mean, Benjamin, right? Benjamin was a very loved president. Everyone loved Benjamin. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, I have a bad story with Benjamin. Benjamin was not elected at all. He was the only candidate at that time. No one went for president, right? And he had SG experience. He maneuvered that. And because of his SG experience, he also knew what he doesn't want to be. And he knew that he had a lot of sort of pressure and he has to prove to the student body, I am worth this position. And he's put all the effort. And I think it manifested really well into his presidency, to be honest. He still comes, people still like him 3 years later. So that's sort of where we were coming from, that I feel like it's not something that you cannot change. You really have to push for the student body to respect you. They don't just respect you by voting you in, right? At least that's what I think, to be honest, like a personal opinion.
Just addressing some of the things that were said over there, like first of all, in regards to the hate that was given to SGA, let's clarify it that were certain selected few members. And even I, as a representative, would say that I'm not here to represent the hate against SGA. We're not here to say that, no, these students, they are actively doing something evil that is not for the good of the people. I mean, we're giving them benefit of doubt and saying that, listen, these are the problems that we have and these are our opinions. So in regards to those hates, I would say that yes, they were there and we acknowledge that they were there, but we also understand and acknowledge that it was not right of the hate to be directed to the representatives. In terms of engagements, a large issue that comes with the engagement is that a lot of people are truly satisfied with the way Georgetown is. And so as a result, they don't see any, I understand, they don't see a direct engagement with the SGA. The only direct engagement that people do with SGA is through SLC.
Yeah.
And a majority of SLC, I've been reading a lot of the SLC, write-ups, and what I've seen constantly is the issue of financial aid. So this is something that I thought of. You could go all your 4 years without having any problem, no engagement with the SLC, no problems, and thus no engagement with the SGA. And so when there's a limit, when there's essentially a rule created that limits the people who can get into SGA, that becomes very illegitimate to these people because they don't see that active, the amount of work that the SGA is doing because they don't have that much participation. So in that regards, I think that even if there is no engagement, even if nobody shows up into the Karakan conversation and all of the other events that the SGA is doing, which I would say that they're doing a good job in all of these, I think still the SGA has a responsibility to continue trying their best to engage with the student body. And I think that's something that you can agree with as well. In regards to the incentives and the issue of the participation, I think there's a simple solution to this that me and some of the other student body kind of thought of, which would be a better solution. And that could be that if we spot that there's a lot of people who are participating for president and vice president, why don't we separate the elections? So first, let's say 3 months before going to summer holidays, we first have a president and vice president kind of voting. I don't understand how it is going on currently because I was not there for last year. So we have something like that 3 months before. And then we have the SGA members or the representatives happening very later. So that gives the 3 months for the members who are selected as the president or the vice president. It gives them the opportunity to be a shadow and to be essentially get experience. And also for those who fail to be a part of the presidency, they also get the opportunity to apply as a representative on SGA. Don't you think that would be a better way to kind of solve this issue without directly limiting the amount of people who can participate?
I mean, you're absolutely right, first of all, about the engagement piece, which is why when even we continue to have events that do not necessarily go successful, I never looked at it and sort of like was embarrassed, like, oh, the event is like unsuccessful. It is disappointing when you like pour your heart out on something and nobody shows up, but we never like said, okay, no more events for the student body, right? Like we continued to show up every single time. Because even if you don't have something today, you might have something tomorrow, to be honest. And a lot of people interact with me personally. So even if they don't come to an event, they know where to find me, to be honest. I think I'm a very findable person. You can always find me in student life if you didn't know. And they just come, they chase me, they tell me this is my issue. But on the point about basically dividing the elections, this is essentially what ended up happening this year. Not by choice, really. But basically the exec were picked all the way in April, and then class reps were picked closer to July when we did the summer elections. I think, honestly, an issue with that becomes, and I'm not saying this is a bad idea, I'm just saying an issue with that becomes a disconnect within the team. And to me, that is even more scary than a disconnect within the student body, because if the team is not on the same page, we will never be able to do work. So, for example, at that point, it just felt like the exec were already picked. We've already spent 3 months of working together. There's a lot of work that happens in the summer, by the way. Anything about the student lounge, anything about our budget, our events, all of that happens in the summer. So at that point, like in this summer, we met no less than 7 times. We were literally with each other all summer. And at that point, when our reps joined in, I can definitely say in the beginning, we were struggling to get the reps on board, if that makes sense. And they were struggling to open up to us the same way we opened up to ourselves. And I know that this is something that is always sort of mentioned, the exec class rep divide. That because of that, sometimes class reps feel like, you know what, I wasn't even here for the majority of the work in the summer. I can't even voice my opinion. Class reps feel like the exec is more important, which in reality it's not, right? Like aside from the hierarchy comes because the responsibilities are more, not because the person is more important. That's how I see it. So I think it sort of causes that. But to be honest, it's not even about like losing so many people to just elections. It's also, again, about the idea that even then, sometimes people will still not run. Like even now, we had to do it in the summer. We got 3 candidates for the class of 2027, and 2 of them were already elected. So imagine that was like only 1 person's not elected. It still doesn't give students the choices that they want. From what I'm hearing from students, they want choice. They want a couple reps to run, and I get to pick and choose. It didn't feel like it solved it this year. So that's why we sort of, again, going back, we sort of said, you know what, let people get involved with it, want to do more. And then as someone who also sort of climbed up, if that makes sense, like the PRO, chief of staff, and then president, it also shows you example of leadership and what you want to be, but also what you don't want to be. Like there are definitely things you learn. This president did so nice that I want to do exactly the same. And you learn about the team dynamic. You learn how to keep your reps as a team. And there are things that you say, okay, this didn't work for this SGA. I need to change it for the next SGA. So again, that's sort of where all these things come together to make sense.
Okay, I'll be moving on from that question to another question that we have from the Instagram. It says, what safeguard exists to prevent the consolidation of power within the small groups within the SGA? And what I think they're referring to is that the SGA essentially has the ability to change how SGA will function. So that creates a doubt within the student body of what is the balance, how do we balance that the SGA members don't just create a system where they keep on getting elected. This is a sentiment that was shared by some of the student body members.
I find the concept of self problematic. Not that I'm saying it would never happen, but all SGAs sort of draw up their own bylaws and their own constitutions. This is not something that only our student government does, right? The student government draws up how it functions. Of course, this doesn't just come from thin air. Like we meet with senior leadership, we meet with the advisors, we take in feedback from what happens, but every student government draws up what their constitution looks like and what their bylaws look like. And again, up until now, we've never had students complain about the Constitution. But if they did, that would have been taken into consideration. I was there both times we tabled for the last 2 constitutional changes, once as SGA and just once as a student who was curious because I was going to go for PRO. And I will tell you, both times I was the only one. There was no one else that had any interest to know more about the Constitution. So it's not that the SGA is sort of consolidating power, it's that no one has ever had an issue with the way the Constitution was, right? And maybe that's a project for the next SGA to take on as well, sort of feedback on the Constitution. What does everybody have to say? And I will say some of it is logical and some of it sort of is not, because you also have to look at the bureaucracy of the system you're in, how the institution works and whatnot. And also, I did hear that too, that it's like the same group coming in. But on a serious note, looking at the exec, for example, I am the only one that is repetitive, and that's the president. My chief of staff was a first-time SGA person, VP first-time SGA, PRO first-time SGA both times, like the current PRO and the PRO the current PRO. Yeah, the old PRO also had SGA experience. But yeah, you get what I'm saying. And a lot of the reps are also first-time reps, which shows that it's not the same group running in. I think the issue is Georgetown is already a small campus, and I would say there's a max of 30 people who are engaged and doing things all over campus. People get confused when they see us in MUN, and then we have jobs on campus, and I work in student life, and I work in careers. And then people think it's the same group, but it's the same group that is just engaged, right? Yeah. And at the end of the day, just because certain candidates are eligible doesn't mean they will automatically get it. I'm not appointing anyone. The student body is going to elect whoever they want from the 15 candidates that can run, right? So at the end of the day, it's still a choice. Like the current exec, they elected those people in power. So I don't think it can be an argument of consolidating power right now.
But I mean, questioning the question that rises in that response is that, as you mentioned before, that there is not a lot of repetition. So does that not kind of counter the whole idea of making SGA president exclusively for the SGA, considering the fact that they don't even want to repeat as representatives? So, for example, I know multiple SGAs who have directly said to me that I don't want to apply even next year. And they have said that understanding the position and the amount of work that the president does, I don't want to be a president. And they've said this directly, and some of them are my friends. So does that not create the issue ultimately? At the end of the day, will there not be a participation issue again? But this time it would be for the vice president role. And the fact that from each batch only 6 and maximum at a time 15 people will be eligible. And I understand the whole, dynamics with the fact that we've never had a lot of people participating anyway. But I think it's the limit, the fact that we're limiting the position to certain people, that kind of does not sit well with a lot of student body. It is not the fact that there's not much participation, it's more to do with the fact that there's a limit now. So how does this amendment kind of address the participation rate if the SGAs themselves don't want to repeat?
I mean, honestly, again, I think there's a divide here when we speak about SGAs not wanting to repeat. I have heard of a lot of class reps that are not willing to do it again, honestly. And part of that is they feel the role is not engaging. And again, part of that goes to the fact that if people don't engage with us, what really is our role, right? But then with presidency, I think I already mentioned, like literally all of the presidents that had power in the last 4 years were all people who had SGA experience. So people with SGA experience, no, they do run for their leadership roles, that's for sure. But people who were reps, for example, who might not want to do more, that is something we can't really control, because also, again, we're a very engaged campus and that's a good thing, but we're all very busy, honestly. Everyone is taking internships and jobs, and at that point, people sometimes want to just have it once for their resume, but they feel like it's too much work and too little outcome sometimes. Or they feel like it's free work. Why should I do free work? These are all valid reasons people don't run again. And honestly, I don't sort of hold anything against that if someone doesn't want to run again. But that's why I feel it wouldn't limit participation, because again, our presidents, our leadership, they are always repeated. So it wouldn't be an issue, to be honest.
I'm not going to say not what you expect, but I know when I came in as class rep, I had a certain idea, obviously, as what the SGA would be. And then I had another reality, good and bad, in the way that I didn't expect the campus to be as disengaged for sure. But I also did like how involved I was, and it really pushed me to do a lot more. So it really also does come down to the person. I don't think it really is about experience or not necessarily. It's more about the person, whether they want to continue in SGA or they truly care or they don't, or it's not what they expected. I don't think you can really boil it down to one specific reason.
Yeah.
And also, just on a closing note on that, a big part of when we say a campus is disengaged, we're also not blaming the student body, to be honest. As you said, Noor, I think it can be an indication that things are going well. We acknowledge that they didn't go to the Dean's Forum either, right? And that probably means that the students are doing well to a certain extent and that things are going fine. Like, it's okay to not always have issues. We don't always want them to have issues, but it definitely plays a part.
All right. Thank you. Another question that we've had is that why can't experience be gained through any other means except this SGA itself? So we have a lot of student positions, for example, people working in student life and people working in dean's office, and a lot of other paid jobs that give leadership skills and skills necessary to run the SGA, but it just doesn't give the experience. So does the experience play that much of a role? And also, what is the whole reasoning behind requiring only 1 year of experience for presidential candidate, but only 1 semester for vice president?
Okay, so I think it was misinterpreted, sort of the experience requirement. We've never said that you can't get experience otherwise. In fact, as someone who does multiple things on campus, I think I learn a little from everything I do, right? But I think to me, the most important thing was institutional knowledge, institutional experience. And I think that you need in a president role. And what that means is sort of seeing how, for example, some issues might arise when you try to push for certain issues. For example, with the comms policy, that's an issue we pushed for a whole year. But there were just things about the institution that we needed to understand to be able to even have those conversations, right? Like, what can SGA even change? That's something you really need to be aware of. Like, what is the scope of SGA? What can we change and what can we not do? And if we change, how do we change and why do we change? All these things, I think, come to institutional knowledge rather than like experience that you gain elsewhere. Like, sure, negotiation, leadership, you need all of that. But more importantly, you need institutional knowledge is what I think. And on the second part of this, I actually forgot. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The president requiring one.
Okay, I think honestly, it's honestly because of the fact that I feel a president can mentor their team and so their vice president. That's why, like, we have a lot of people who go abroad and we have a couple more people who have served only 1 semester because they had to go abroad. So I was trying to broaden the scope as much as I could for the VP because I did not feel that it was going to be a good choice if we did both positions requiring 1 year, because that would remove a lot of juniors as well. And I genuinely feel like if you have some experience, like a 1 semester experience, you can definitely, with the mentorship of a president that is knowledgeable and experienced, you can easily get in and understand sort of the ropes of your position. So to me, it comes from the fact that VP can be mentored and coached by the president.
Okay, so I'll give you the last question, which is it's essentially a 2-form question, but so you guys released a petition, right? And the last time I checked, it was close to 120 students who signed the petition, voicing their opinion against this amendment, which in the context of this university or this campus is very impressive, right? Like 120 students writing their name down. It's very substantive, right? And in my 3 years here, so it's far exceeded my expectations of, when we talk about engagement of the students with the student government, right? So, but at the same time, there was a sort of like a stipulation that of 250. So why is that the case? Like, why is that the case in the first place? Why do you need 250 students? And would the SGA, if the SGA, releases a petition of students who are in favor of this amendment, can they come up with 250 students themselves? And just walk me through a little of the course of action. Like, is the SGA open to like reversing the amendment if a certain amount of students voice their opinion if a referendum happens? Just the course of action. How open are you into sort of reversing the steps that you've taken?
Okay, I'll say a bit and then I'll leave it to you, okay? We are very open. So I'll say that you guys are getting exclusive information right now, but by the time the episode is out, the email would be out. We are going to be announcing a referendum that's going to go out tomorrow. Even though we did not hit the 250 threshold, right? So honestly, the reason the 250 threshold came from was I was just advised so by the administration, because we have never had a GQ referendum, right? This is the first time in history that we're doing a Georgetown Qatar referendum. So when I was sort of looking at our paperwork constitution, I could not find what are the rules, how do I play by this, and how do we go? So I was advised by the administration that it should be 51% of the student body, which is why when I released the statement, I sort of put that number there so people understand. But then when I thought of it and when I did hear people out, and I think this can be a testament for us being able to really openly hear and change accordingly, someone pointed out that but it's not the same for elections. And while we can't necessarily make it 100% the same, what we actually did to come up with the new number for the referendum was I checked the data for the last 4 years for election and we matched the voter turnout to the voter turnout of elections. So it's going to be exactly the same. And it's not going to be some absolute number that students feel like they cannot hit. So the referendum is going in place with or without the 250. I think 120 in our campus, and Ali, as you said, with the context is significant enough for me to at least give them that, right? At least give them a referendum. I don't have, at this point, I don't know if it will pass or not, to be honest, because even the petition, I think there are question marks, students being coerced and everything, but I think at least 120 is enough of a number for me to say maybe the student body needs to say something about this. And so the referendum is going to go through, but this is how we decided it, to be honest.
But yeah, and we didn't start the petition. It was a student-led thing, which also gave it a lot more
credibility, 100%.
Yeah, so that was another thing that kind of added on to that.
And honestly, like, she was even tallying, like...
Yeah, okay. And that's what I was kind of like looking for if we want to discuss, but we were tallying kind of group chats to see like who was speaking for and against it, just to make sure that it wasn't, like we said, like kind of like loud ones or people just vocalizing for or against, like both sides. So we were looking at the numbers and they were very close to each other, which is why we also like, another thing that pushed us to do the referendum, just we thought that it would be the most fair and kind of like answering what students wanted at the end of the day.
Yeah, and again, just to sort of close on this, regardless of what happens with the referendum, by the way, we don't know until you guys know either. It's not administered by SGA, it's administered by Student Affairs. I will only be able to look at it once I'm ready to announce the results to everyone tomorrow. But I think regardless of what happens, we have taken the call for action from students. When you guys have called for a referendum, when students have called for a referendum, we have done a referendum, but we were not able to revoke these changes with no referendum because that ignores, 120 is about 1/4 of the student population, but that ignores the majority of the student population. And I am aware that unfortunately not everyone is engaged. So maybe there's some people that we can't get to, they won't vote at all. But we try our best with the processes that we have in mind, similar to elections, to get a pulse of the student body. So I would really, really encourage everyone to actually vote.
Like, it's not like we were trying to kind of just defend our position or anything like that. Even the title of that tabling, information session, was very intentional in the way that we were genuinely just trying to explain why these amendments came in the first place. And after hearing the student body, like, we genuinely do want to do what everyone wants, and we do genuinely care.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of GQ Speaks. We hope you've gained valuable insights and inspirations from our conversation today. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to follow us on our Instagram page at GQ_speaks, and be sure to leave a review on Spotify to show your support.